Now that the NATO-supported rebels have supposedly taken Tripoli and Libya, we have to ask the question, will the rebel government of Libya begin to ethnically cleanse the country of its black population and black migrant workers? It's a legitimate question. Even today, the African Union chairman said that the rebels were confusing black Libyans with African mercenaries. Now, this is even in itself a misconception, as from the beginning of the war, as the beginning of the fighting back in February, there were major reports, mostly in the African media, of the rebels as they were taking territory, killing and ethnically cleansing entire towns of black Libyans and black migrant workers. This population makes up roughly 1/3 of Libya's population, so it's quite significant. As the Wall Street Journal reported, in the town of Misrata, a rebel-held town of Misrata, there was major ethnic cleansing, racist slogans being held up by the rebels, referring to them as a group purging Libya of slaves and black skin. That was an actual rebel slogan. But the rebels were not confusing black Libyans with mercenaries. As an Amnesty International report after a major investigation revealed, the rebels were actually manufacturing and falsifying information, spreading rumors about Gaddafi's African mercenaries. This was heard widely in the West, in Western press, and even governments repeating this as an excuse for NATO's intervention in Libya. However, as it turned out, and the Amnesty investigation itself revealed, what the rebels were doing were kidnapping African migrant workers, often in the middle of the night from their homes, parading them in front of the media, foreign media, Western media, as captured African mercenaries used by Gaddafi to crush the rebellion. They were put in front of the media, photographed, propagandized, then often they were just simply released later, or if they weren't so lucky, they would have been lynched and killed. Now, there were reports of thousands of first of all, hundreds of thousands of migrant workers and other black Libyans fled to neighboring countries in a major exodus, which could precede a major humanitarian crisis. Further, the thousands of migrant workers who were returning to their home countries were telling stories of absolute horror, including even mass graves, where all their possessions, their homes were ransacked and destroyed. They would be beaten, imprisoned, even killed. So there's been reported cases of ethnic cleansing. But now that we have supported this rebel movement, which is itself a very small minority within Libya, and they have now come to power, we have to ask the question if they will proceed to ethnically cleanse the entire country of black Libyans and black migrant workers. This could be a major humanitarian crisis, unprecedented in Libya, certainly. It's interesting that the reasons for the humanitarian intervention, also revealed in the Amnesty International report, along with Doctors Without Borders and Human Rights Watch reports, that all the reasons for the war were totally made up. The so-called massacres that Gaddafi was committing turned out to be, in 2 different towns, less than a combined total of 200 dead, including Gaddafi forces themselves, which indicate that there was fighting, not simply a massacre. However, we heard numbers of thousands, and that Gaddafi was bombing his civilians with planes and jets and helicopters. And of course, this all turned out to be false as well, as did the mercenary story, as did the rape story. all the stories turned out to be false, because this wasn't about humanitarian concerns. This was about empire. This was about oil and getting rid of an old rival now that they had their opportunity. So they install a radical, militant, Al-Qaeda-linked, CIA-supported, armed, funded, directed rebel government, which we call, inevitably, pro-democracy. Because if they're killing people for you, then they're killing people for democracy. But if they do anything against you, like support their own citizens, use their own natural resource wealth to support the poor in the country, then these are the ultimate crimes. These are not crimes against humanity, these are crimes against imperialism. So the empire must set it dead against the country. I'm not saying that Gaddafi was a great man by any means, he was a dictator. But he was also a thorn in the side of the empire and had been so for 40 years. And despite the recent economic concessions to the Western countries and corporations, he was also causing further problems, leading to major oil companies such as Chevron and others leaving. So now that they have their rebel government, you already have reports of the oil companies making contacts with the rebels, signing agreements. So of course you have a minority government in power, which is always preferable to a populist democracy, which serves the interests of the people. Not that Gaddafi was a populist democracy, but as it turned out, he, in the end, became a bit of a populist. As Scott Taylor reported in the Halifax Chronicle Herald in mid-August, from his recent trip to Tripoli, Gaddafi apparently had 85% support among the people. Now this is not surprising considering NATO was bombing them and killing them and taking out hospitals and schools and these types of things. So no wonder that people began to support Gaddafi even more than before. So the rebels themselves presumably had less than 15% of the support among the Libyan people. We were led to believe that they were a democratic, popular uprising. That in no small part could be due to the fact that back in April, the Libyan Rebels hired a major American PR firm to promote their cause in the United States. In early July, they hired the #1 lobbying firm in Washington, D.C. to again promote their cause both in Congress and in the United States with the public. So of course you see support for the rebels growing and increasing, even though the Washington Post apparently just got the memo that now that the rebels have power, they are also indiscriminately killing black Libyans. But of course we will wash over these minor indiscrepancies and continue to support these democratic, principled, Al-Qaeda, CIA-linked leaders that we call freedom fighters. Just like Reagan called the Afghan Mujahideen, the prelude to Al-Qaeda, freedom fighters. Just like anybody you want to support, death squads, terrorists, etc. If you need to support them, you call them freedom fighters. And if you don't want to support them, you call them dictators and tyrants and murderers and call for humanitarian intervention. The hypocrisy is of course never ending, but the dangers are increasing. Specifically, since this government is now in power, there is, I think, a major potential for Libya to be ethnically cleansed of its black population. Of course, time will tell, but this is a major concern and one of immediate necessity. So I guess we'll see what happens. But then again, NATO is no stranger to supporting genocide.